Chapter 4 Mystery and Wonder. Ben wasn't at all sure that Raj was right about Granny. That night it was the same old story. Granny served up cabbage soup, followed by cabbage pie, and for dessert it was cabbage mousse. She even found some cabbage-flavoured after-dinner chocolates somewhere. After dinner, Granny and Ben sat down together on the musty sofa, as they always did. "Scrabble time!" exclaimed Granny. Cabbage-flavoured chocolates are not as nice as they sound. They don't sound that nice. Great, thought Ben. Tonight's going to be 1,000,000 times more boring than last week. Ben detested Scrabble. If he had it his way, Ben would build a rocket and blast all the Scrabble boards in the world into outer space. Granny pulled out the dusty old Scrabble box from the sideboard and set up the game on the poof. Ben sighed. What seemed like decades later, but was probably just hours, Ben stared at his letters before scanning the board. He had already put down boring, ancient, quack, double word score, pointless, pongy. This had to be checked in the dictionary. Wrinkles, cabbage stick, triple word score. Escape, help, I hate this stupid game. Granny had disallowed this on account of it not being one word. He had an E, an M, an I, a U, and a D. Granny had just put down Murray Mint, double word score, so Ben used the T at the end to form the word tedium. "Well, it's nearly 8 o'clock, young man," announced Granny, looking at her little gold watch. "Time for your beddy buys, I think." Ben groaned inwardly. Beddy buys? He wasn't a toddler. "But I don't have to go to bed until 9 o'clock at home," he protested. "And not until 10 o'clock when I haven't got school the next morning." "No, Ben. Off you go to bed, please." The old lady could be quite firm when she wanted to be. "And don't forget to brush your teeth. I'll be up soon to give you a bedtime story, if you like. You always used to love a bedtime story." Later, Ben stood at the sink in the bathroom. It was a cold, damp room with no window. Some of the tiles had fallen off the wall. There was just one sad little frayed towel and a very worn bar of soap that looked like it was half soap, half mould. Ben hated brushing his teeth, so he pretended to brush his teeth. Pretending to brush your teeth is simple. Don't tell your parents I told you, but if you want to try it for yourself, all you have to do is follow this handy step-by-step guide. Turn on the cold tap, wet the toothbrush, squeeze a tiny amount of toothpaste onto your finger and place finger in mouth. Move the trace of toothpaste around your mouth with your tongue, spit, turn off the tap. See? It's so easy. Nearly as easy as brushing your teeth. Ben looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He was 11 years old, but shorter than he wanted to be, so he stood on his tiptoes for a moment. Ben was aching to be older. Only a few more years, he thought, and he would be taller and hairier and spottier, and his Friday nights would be very different. He wouldn't have to stay at boring old grannies anymore. Instead, Ben would be able to do all the thrilling things the older kids in the town did on Friday nights. Hang around with a gang of friends outside the off-licence, waiting for someone to tell you off. Or, alternatively, sit at the bus stop with some girls in tracksuits and chew gum and never actually get on a bus. Yes, a world of mystery and wonder awaited him. However, for now, even though it was still light outside and he could hear boys in the nearby park playing football, it was time for Ben to go to sleep. In a hard little bed in a damp little room in his granny's run-down little bungalow that smelled of cabbage. Not just a little bit, a lot. Sighing, Ben got under the covers. Just then, Granny gently opened the door to his bedroom. He quickly shut his eyes and pretended to be asleep. She lumbered over to the bed, and Ben could feel her standing over him for a moment. "I was going to tell you that bedtime story," she whispered. The old lady had often told him stories when he was younger, about pirates and smugglers and master criminals, but he was far too old for all that nonsense now. "What a shame you're asleep already," she said. "Well, I just wanted to say that I love you. Good night, my little Benny." He hated being called Benny, too, and little. The nightmare continued as Ben sensed his granny bending over him to give him a kiss. The prickly old hairs on her chin bristled uncomfortably against his cheek. Then he heard a familiar rhythmic quacking sound as her bum squeaked with every step. She squeaked her way back to the door and closed it behind her, sealing the smell in. That's it, thought Ben. I have to escape. Chapter 5. A Little Broken. No, reader. You haven't bought the Swahili edition of this book by mistake. That was the sound Ben was waiting for. Granny snoring. She was asleep. Ben crept out of his room and made his way over to the telephone in the hall. It was one of those old-style telephones that purred like a cat when you dialed a number. "Mum," he whispered. "I can hardly hear you," she shouted back. There was loud jazz music playing in the background. Mum and Dad were at the arena again, watching Strictly Stars Dancing Live on Stage Live. She was probably drooling as Flavio Flavioli swivelled his hips and broke the hearts of 1,000 women of a certain age. "What's the matter? Is everything all right? The old bat hasn't died, has she?" "No, she's fine, but I hate it here. Can't you come and pick me up, please?" whispered Ben. "Flavio hasn't even done his second dance yet. Please," he pleaded. "I want to come home. Granny is such a bore. It's torture spending time with her." "Speak to your dad." Ben heard a muffled sound as she passed the phone over. "Hello?" shouted Dad. "Please keep your voice down." "What?" he shouted again. "Shh! Keep your voice down. You're going to wake up Granny. Can you come and pick me up, Dad, please? I hate it here." "No, we cannot. Seeing this show is a once-in-a-lifetime experience." "You saw it last Friday," protested Ben. "Twice in a lifetime, then. And you said you were going again next Friday too. Look, if I have any more of your cheek, young lad, you can stay with her until Christmas. Goodbye." With that, his dad hung up. Ben carefully placed the receiver back in its cradle, and the phone made the quietest ting. Suddenly, he noticed that Granny's snoring had stopped. Had she heard what he'd said? He looked behind him and thought he saw her shadow, but then it was gone. It was true that Ben found her dreadfully dull, but he didn't want her to know that. After all, she was a lonely old widow, and her husband had died long before Ben was even born. Guiltily, Ben crept back to the spare room and waited and waited and waited for the morning. At breakfast, Granny seemed different. Quieter, older maybe, a little broken. Her eyes looked bloodshot, as if she'd been crying. Did she hear? Thought Ben. I really hope she didn't hear. She stood by the oven as Ben sat in the tiny kitchen table. Granny was pretending to be interested in her calendar, which was pinned to the wall above the oven. Ben could tell she was pretending because there was nothing interesting on her calendar. It was a typical week in Granny's hectic life. Monday, make cabbage soup, play Scrabble against yourself, read a book. Tuesday, make cabbage pie, read another book, blow off. Make the dish chocolate surprise. The surprise is that it's made of no chocolate at all, and in fact it's 100% cabbage. Suck a Murray mint all day. She can make one mint last a lifetime. Friday, still suck the same Murray mint. My wonderful grandson visits. Saturday, my wonderful grandson leaves. Have a nice sit down. Pooped. Sunday, eat roast cabbage with braised cabbage and boiled cabbage on the side. Blow off all day. Eventually, Granny turned away from the calendar. Your mummy and daddy will be here soon, she said, finally breaking the silence. Yes, said Ben, looking at his watch. Just a few more minutes. The minutes felt like hours, days even, months. A minute can be a long time. Don't believe me? Then sit in a room on your own and do nothing but count for 60 seconds. Have you done it yet? I don't believe you. I'm not joking. I want you to really go and do it. I am not carrying on with the story until you do. It's not my time you're wasting. I've got all day. Right, have you done it now? Good. Now back to the story. At just after 11 o'clock, the little brown car pulled up in front of Granny's house. Much like a getaway driver for a bank robbery, Mum kept the engine running. She leaned over and opened the passenger door so Ben could dive in quickly and they could zoom off. As Ben trudged towards the car, Granny stood at the front door. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea, Linda?" she shouted. "No thanks," said Ben's mum. "Quick, Ben, for goodness sake, get in!" She revved the engine. "I don't want to have to talk to the old dear." "Shh," said Ben. "She'll hear you." "I thought you didn't like Granny," said Mum. "I didn't say that, Mum. I said I found her boring, but I don't want her to know that, do I?" Mum laughed as they sped off out of Grey Close. "I wouldn't worry, Ben. Your Granny isn't really with it. She probably doesn't understand what you're saying half the time." Ben frowned. He wasn't sure about that. He wasn't sure at all. He remembered Granny's face at the breakfast table. Suddenly, he had a horrible feeling she understood a lot more than he had ever realised. Chapter 6, tomorrow's, is going to be called Cold Wet Egg. Lovely.